Imagine trying to swim in that. Okay? And this was the only victim of the 1910 flood. The widow of the village leader. She was, by this time, she was elderly and blind, and the flood came, and she couldn't find her way out of the flood waters, and she was swept away and drowned. Okay. Meanwhile, down in the village, when the flood came, there were very few people there. Only a few old people like we, and Charles and Effie Coe, the teachers and the cook. And when the flood came in the middle of the night, they got up on top of the schoolhouse and rode it out in the middle of the swirling waters. And early in the morning, when the man came down to rescue them, they left the canyon, and on the way out, they left the signature of the flood, the memorial to catastrophe. And it's still there. You can still see it if you know where to look. January 2nd, 1910. Okay. So what would our reaction to such an event be? Well, we put up levees, we channelize the river, put up a few dams, maybe put some big stone walls around our houses. Let's look at the Havasupai response. Okay. Okay, before, I don't know if you can see this or not, before 1910, before the flood, look where everybody lives. They're living up near the headwaters where the creek rises. A few people living downstream, but all up against the cliffs. Okay? Now it's a little harder to see this one, you can make the dots big enough, but you'll see that everybody's gone. They're following the Havasupai principle. When nature gets boisterous, know how to get out of the way. This was not a good place to be. This is where the canyon's very constricted. You have two canyons coming together with floods coming down both ways. So everybody moved but two people. Everybody's moved down this way. More people down here now. 1928, the Indian Service decided to improve the original irrigation system. They put in a complete irrigation system with culverts and head gates, and the purpose of the head gates was in case of a flood. So if a flood comes, you shut down the irrigation system, keep the silt out of it, and that works fine as long as we have these two people living up here, because when a flood would come, they could get to the head gates in time. Okay. This is from about 1950 to 1980. The whole village has moved down here now. There's no one up here anymore. One family living here. When the floods come now, there's nobody to close the head gates. By the time the flood comes, you can't get up to the head gates in time. Now when a flood comes, the irrigation system completely fills up with silt. And now look what at the village today. Completely concentrated here. Nobody up there anymore. Even the lone family here is gone now. So one of the first things the government did after the village moved was we followed suit. And we said we needed a new school site. So they approached three individuals, Banya, Kit Jones, his son, and Bak Tagola, who's listed in the record as package of coffee. And I said they would pay them $25 each for the perpetual use of their land, right in the middle of the widest part of the canyon. And they established a school site. In 1912, they built this school and salvaged the bell from the 1895 school. Okay. And up until in the 1960s even, this was a much simpler time. There were still about 250 people living in the canyon. The farmlands, as you can see, are largely unencumbered. No electricity, no running water. People living in what amounted to small field houses, and farming was still big. Today, this isn't Phantom Ranch. This is a 24/7 community. Kids, old people, pets, livestock, school, clinic, you name it. All the infrastructure of a modern community. And you can see there's not a whole lot of farmland left. Okay, let's look at some of the... Find a public area for public purposes in the village is not a simple matter because there's not a lot of land and a lot of people. And so you have to find sites that aren't claimed, aren't wanted, or otherwise usable. So let's look at the first one is... Show up? Click again. There. The first one was given to the people of the village by a man named Bonamita, and it's the festival grounds, the dance grounds. And you pass that when you come into the village. The next piece was the big public area where the school is, and that's where the cafe and all the things that you're all familiar with if you've come into the village. And the third piece was down here, and that's where the sewage settling ponds are for the village sewage system. The fourth piece is the village landfill, and the fifth piece is another secondary landfill. Okay. And here's downtown, you're all familiar with this. The festival grounds, the trail coming into the village, passing through the village, and on down to the falls. And there's the pinnacles that we leave it. Okay. And this is the main public area. And there we can delineate what's public land here. There's the helicopter landing field, the cafe, the community building, the school, the tribal council offices, some of the employee housing, the tourist office, the tourist lodge, and the church is kind of semi-public, I guess. And then back here, sort of off the screen, is a secondary landfill site and the equipment yards and storage site for all kinds of materials. So that's what most of our focus is going to be on, that public area. Okay. So how do people make a living here? Well, this started to change around 1900, and especially with the coming of the park. With the loss of resources, the Havasupai had to turn to another means of supporting themselves, and that was the cash economy and wage labor. And they went into it in a big way. And most of us know the story of how the Havasupai were responsible for getting the bridge across the Grand Canyon. 40 men were hired to carry down two 400-foot, 2,200-pound cables on their shoulders in 1928 down the new South Kaibab Trail, without which we wouldn't have the Black Bridge today. They carried it down the trail, laid it by the creek, made a sweat bath, refreshed themselves, and staged a foot race back to the ring. But what's not so well known is the Havasupais also laid rail for the Grand Canyon rail line. They built worked on many of the roads that go through and around in the park. They laid the first water line from Indian Garden up to Grand Canyon Village. They laid the sewer line from Grand Canyon Village out to the settling ponds west of the village. And most importantly, they built, improved, and maintained almost all the South Rim trails. So the Havasupais are responsible for much of the infrastructure of the present-day park. And in fact, it was so important to the park that the superintendent of the park characterized him as the best workers he could get. And that continues today. Havasupai workers work on trail work, they work in offices and tribal buildings.